Happy Pride Month! Queens Public Library continues its ongoing commitment to promote queer liberation and representation across our borough and beyond. Whether you're looking for books and resources, engaging in inclusive programs, or just seeking a welcoming space, we are here for you. Come on by and let us know what's your query. For more information, visit queenslib.org/Pride 2023. Summer reading kicks off this month. Visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org for our full summer reading program schedule, book lists for all ages, and other resources to keep your kids engaged and learning all summer long. Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. Check out our reading lists and join us for a wide range of programs to learn more about this important day in U.S. history. Visit our website for more information.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's Talk with Bill Hayes, author of Insomniac City, New York, Oliver Sacks, and Me, and Sweat, A History of Exercise. The New Yorker wrote of Insomniac City, this touching memoir of the late neurologist Oliver Sacks by a photographer and writer with whom he fell in love near the end of his life, turns a story of death into a celebration. Anne Lamott, author of Bird by Birth, said of Insomniac City, a beautifully written once-in-a-lifetime book about love, about life, soul, and the wonderful loving genius Oliver Sacks, and New York, and laughter, and all of creation. I love that. I love Anne Lamott. The Guardian wrote of Sweat, there is a playfulness in Hayes' writing, which reaches from a rich topsoil of endearing wordplay to the deepest layers of curiosity and empathy. He takes a profound historian's pleasure in tropes that echo across centuries. Actress Jane Fonda said of Sweat, I was riveted by Sweat and its extraordinary tale of the ups and downs of exercise over millennia. Who knew? Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I've written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Penk, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, The Gay and Lesbian Review, and I've recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marrier Media in 2011 and is streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, was released in April by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Bill Hayes is the author of 6 books, right, Bill? He is also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Nonfiction and is a frequent contributor to the New York Times. He has also written for BuzzFeed, The Guardian, the New York Review of Books, T, the New York Times Style magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. A collection of his street photography, How New York Breaks Your Heart, was published recently by Bloomsbury. Hayes has completed the screenplay for a film adaptation of Insomniac City, currently in the works from Hopscotch Features, and he is also a co-editor of Oliver Sacks's posthumous books. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us this evening. We apologize for the delay. There was an issue with Facebook.
That's okay. Great to be here. And out of the Canadian haze.
Yes, out of the Canadian haze. Anybody in the Northeast right now can appreciate that, or not appreciate it, or appreciate that it's no longer here.
Yes.
There we go. So Insomniac City is an account of your insomnia, but also your relationship with, of course, the neurologist and author Oliver Sacks, and a period of grieving over your boyfriend Steve, and your love affair with New York City. It's so many things. Please tell us how it all began after moving to New York City at the age of 48 in 2008. Is that correct?
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, I moved to New York at 48 from San Francisco. That was about 14 years ago. And sort of started my life over. I had lost a partner in San Francisco very suddenly, unexpectedly, traumatically. Took me a couple of years to get reoriented. And then I just decided I'm going to start fresh. And I'd always wanted to live in New York. So I bought a one-way ticket and moved here, got a job. And I had corresponded with Oliver Sacks, the writer. He'd read one of my books, but we didn't meet in person until I moved to New York. And pretty quickly fell in love and had a romance and a love affair and relationship until his death in 2015. And during that period, I kept a journal. I was writing about my life in New York, and it all comes together, and taking photographs. It all comes together in Insomniac City.
It does, and quite beautifully and holistically, I might add. It's very organic, the interplay between the photos and your writing. But you had come to New York a few times or regularly before you ended up moving here, right?
Yeah.
What was the difference between coming to New York as a tourist versus becoming a resident? I've never had that experience because I'm from New York, so
You're from Queens.
I'm from Queens, yeah.
You know, I think it was very interesting to move here at 48 in middle age, having lived some life and wanting to start fresh here. There's sort of the cliche of someone moving to New York in their 20s to become famous or rich or start a career. I came here and I feel like New York sort of saved my life. And I fell in love with the city first, enjoying everything from the subways to just wandering around the city and meeting fellow New Yorkers.
That's great.
Yeah.
And tell us about those fellow New Yorkers that you met at night. I'm so intrigued by the nocturnal New York City of readers specifically that you discovered.
Yeah. I moved into an apartment in the West Village when I first moved here, a 6th floor walk up. So I had that classic New York experience of a 6th floor walk up. And when I couldn't sleep at night, sometimes I'd walk around the village and around Manhattan. And one night wandered through Abingdon Square Park, which is very near here. And here were people reading under the light of street lamps.
That's great.
The street lamps just casting light on the books they were reading, and reading books and newspapers and poetry, sometimes in the middle of the night. It seemed like a classic New York scene.
Wow. Wow, it's just beautiful. It almost has like a very romantic, surreal quality. I envision it. I mean, I can't wait for the film adaptation to see how this will be, visually interpreted, but it has a great mood to it already.
Yeah.
As we said, your book is peppered with photos. Please talk a little bit more about them. How do strangers feel when you approach them? Because first of all, you're very bold and comfortable with approaching perfect strangers and asking them to be photographed by you, but they're also, it seems like they were very receptive too.
Yeah, I did not set out to become a photographer or a street photographer. There was no master plan. There was no memoir envisioned. I moved to New York. I bought a little camera. This was 2009, really before people used iPhones or smartphones to take pictures. And I bought this great little Canon digital camera, which I could slip into a pocket. And I thought of it as my spy camera. And because I didn't know New York, I would pick a neighborhood, get on the subway, go to a borough I didn't know, and just walk around. And I had always loved street photography. Deanne Arbus, Gary Winograd, Lee Friedlander. So I was just having fun. It was sort of almost like a hobby, but I always from the beginning wanted to photograph people. And my MO from the beginning was to approach people and ask, may I take your picture? Because I didn't want to just be a kind of voyeur with a zoom lens taking pictures without permission. And what happens in that brief exchange with a stranger on the street can sometimes be quite magical.
Yeah.
Now, I should say, not everyone says yes.
I was going to say, tell me about the no's.
Well, the no's far outweigh the yeses.
Okay. Interesting.
We do live in New York. And
sure.
So yeah, many people would say no, but I became more and more thick-skinned about that. I learned early on not to try to talk people into getting photographed. But it was I think it's a kind of instinctive reaction that they trust that I'm going to take a photograph that's not going to be embarrassing or weird or anything like that, that I want to create an on-the-spot portrait. And when it works, it's quite magical.
It's kind of flattering too, I would think.
Yeah, I guess so.
To have someone ask to take your photo.
Yeah, and the thing is, I see the photo in my mind before I actually approach the person or couple or family and take the picture. So it's almost like I can see it composed, and I just start approaching and think, I have to take a picture. I have to ask, and so it's almost composed in my mind before I take it. But I have to take it fast because you have to be spontaneous. People become self-conscious very quickly.
Sure.
You don't want that sort of camera smile. And I think the street photography began to capture these moments. And, I started doing that in 2009, and Oliver saw them along the way, but I didn't really show people the photographs until maybe 5 or 6 years later. I would print them on a cheap Canon printer and pin them on the walls of my apartment. It was just like a collection of New Yorkers papering the walls of my apartment in the West Village. And then published them really for the first time with Insomniac City, where there are about 40 photographs.
I was curious about the people who made it into the book. Do they know that they're in the book? Were they contacted somehow, or do they don't, someday maybe they'll come across it? And
a few people have and have reached out to me via my website.
Oh, that's great.
But again, I always ask permission before I took the picture. And I really wanted the photographs in Insomniac City to feel like you're passing a stranger in the street. So you read a chapter or a portion of the book, you turn the page, there's a photograph taken on the streets of New York without a story behind it necessarily. In the book itself, very rarely do I explain the story behind a photo. There's a title, but I just wanted to feel like you're passing a stranger on the streets of New York to whom you've stopped and said hello.
Well, the most fascinating thing in the book, and there's a lot of fascinating things about it, is how you reveal sort of this very intimate relationship with an extremely public figure, Oliver Sacks. I mean, he was very widely known, a very famous scientist and writer, and yet also it's full of completely anonymous people. That, whom we'll never know. I love that there's that interplay between the two. I think it's a very unique and sort of fascinating approach. You talk about when you first came to New York, how obviously there was a difference between coming as a tourist and then becoming a resident. Did you anticipate a kind of epiphany, or did what you anticipate match or not match what the reality ended up becoming once you got settled?
I think I anticipated match. It is indeed a romance about a city. I think that was really front of mind for me, that the memoir is not only about my relationship in life with Oliver Sacks, as you said, this brilliant, groundbreaking, and eccentric and neurotic neurologist, but it's also about falling in love with the city. In my case, it's New York, but it could be, any city. It could be San Francisco. It could be Paris. It could be Sydney, Australia. I think people do have relationships with a city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We had Ada Calhoun on a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about her book, her memoir.
I love that memoir.
That's so beautiful. And like Insomniac City, it's also a love letter to New York City. Oliver is the one who encouraged you to keep a journal, right? And your book does include a lot of entries. Please talk to us about journaling, and especially as it pertained to Oliver.
Yeah, the book is a mix of different kinds of prose. So yes, there are entries straight from my journal, which I started in 2009 at Oliver's suggestion, and I'll tell you about that. Mixed with essays that I wrote that were published in the New York Times with sort of more conventional or narrative prose, looking back on my life in New York and with Oliver, and then again the photographs.
Mhm.
But yeah, when I met Oliver in New York, it was 2009,
Mhm.
and I had not published a book or really any writing or done any writing since my late partner Steve had died. So it had
Mhm.
been about 3 years, I guess, since I had written anything at all. And
Yeah.
I remember at our first lunch, Oliver said, "What are you working on? What are you writing?" He had read my earlier book, The Anatomist, and
Mhm.
that's really how we met. And I said, nothing, I'm not
Mhm.
writing these days. And he said, "Well, you must keep a journal. You must at least keep a journal." And he told me that he had something like 600 journals that he had kept since he was in college. And
Yeah.
and he said, "Start now. Start right now." And we were in a restaurant with a paper table setting, and he handed me a felt pen, and I wrote the date, April 2009, and I said on the paper tablecloth, "Oliver Sacks says I must keep a journal." And
What a way to start a journal. My God.
I I tore the piece of paper from the paper tablecloth,
Mhm.
and that was the first entry in the journal. Started in 2009, and I just kept at it. And
Mhm.
I never really imagined that it would become part of a memoir. But when it came to writing Insomniac City, I reread this diary, this journal, which I'd kept for 6 years at that point. And these conversations with Oliver, these scenes with Oliver, these sometimes profound, sometimes hilarious lines from Oliver just kind of jumped off the page. They
Mm.
were still in real time. And I realized I didn't really have to do anything with them, just put
Mm.
them on the page as they are. And they put you, the reader, right into that apartment with us, or
Yeah.
right on the walk that we're taking with us as we have a conversation.
Yes.
So I really like how they capture that kind of real time immediacy.
Yes. I was going to say that was the word I was going to use. There's a real immediacy and intimacy to
Mm.
those exchanges. And I imagine too, journaling lends itself to memoir writing.
Uh-huh.
I'm a fiction writer primarily, but I would imagine that keeping a journal exercises that memoirist's muscle
Yeah,
in
for
some way.
sure.
Yeah.
So, the book also includes all kinds of vignettes and
Mhm.
encounters with strangers on the streets of New York, or
Mhm.
with Ali, who runs a smoke shop
Yeah, I
down
love
the
that.
street. There's lots
Uh,
of Ali. So I would also just write about my encounters and experiences and adventures in New York. And again, I didn't plan to include those until I began working on the memoir,
mm,
and decided they would provide that sense of sort of immediacy,
mm.
but also in contrast with other portions of the book that are more kind of conventional narrative prose for a memoir.
There, there's a line in your book that really struck me. Talk to me about beauty coming in unbeautiful ways in New York. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, beauty coming in unbeautiful ways. I think that's a true sign of falling in love with New York.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, there are lots of reasons to hate living in New York or to find it difficult.
Mhm.
It's crowded, it's noisy, it's dirty, it's difficult in the winter, it's hot in the summer. But sometimes there's great beauty just in all of these different people coming together in this very small, massive land
Mhm.
geographically.
Yeah.
And yeah, finding beauty in sometimes unbeautiful ways.
Yeah, I like that. Um, Getting back to Oliver, we all feel like we know him based on his many wonderful books, which include, of course, An Anthropologist on Mars, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, Music Ophelia, Awakenings, which was made into the very famous film with Robert De Niro
Right.
and Robin Williams. But what do we not know? Please tell us about him and your relationship with him. What can you add that maybe is not, or if you had to glean from the book, and sort of share with our viewers some insight.
Well, I think Insomniac City gives a very intimate view of Oliver, the private Oliver. I think it's important for people who haven't read the book or don't know that Oliver was 75 when I met him. I was 48. He was gay, but had never come out. And he had never had a romantic or domestic relationship his entire life. Insomniac City is very much about reinvention, about reinventing yourself, reinventing your life. I reinventing my life as I moved to New York, but also Oliver, in a sense, reinventing his life by coming out, falling in love, having a relationship. However, Oliver was very private, and our relationship was completely private up until the last year of his life, 2015, when for the first time in his life, at age 81, he published an autobiography in which he wrote candidly about being gay, about being closeted all those years, and about our relationship. And that memoir, which is a beautiful book called On the Move, was published in April 2015. He died 4 months later in August 2015. And it was something that he wanted to do. He was ready to do that. And I think he wrote about that beautifully. The book is about his whole life and career, but that is one part of it for sure. So I think Insomniac City gives a kind of intimate feeling for what Oliver was like day to day, sometimes hilarious, neurotic, eccentric, but also brilliant.
Yes. Yeah, and you do capture all those things. I have to ask about this because you and Oliver visited who is probably my favorite living musician, Bjork. I want to hear about this encounter with her. You went to her home in Iceland.
Yeah.
You write about it in the book. Can you tell our viewers a little bit what it was like hanging out with Bjork?
Yeah. What an unlikely pair of friends.
I know.
Bjork and Oliver Sacks.
How did they meet, first of all?
Well, Bjork got involved with a documentary for the BBC about music. And she was sort of the host, or it was her documentary. And she asked Oliver if he would appear and talk about music and the brain, because she had been very influenced by his book, Musicophilia, which is about music and neurology in the brain, case histories of people. He did do it. He did it in a studio, but they never met in person. And they had some nice correspondence, but he appeared in the documentary. And she invited Oliver to come to Reykjavik and to meet. And he asked me, would you want to go? And I said, Bjork, are you kidding me?
Of course, yeah.
I had to give him a sort of crash course in Bjork because he really did not know her music or any pop music after, say, 1955. So he didn't know her music, but he understood that she was a very gifted artist. And we decided to go to Iceland. We had lunch at her home and spent time with her, and then explored Iceland, which was amazing. And then we went back we first visited in August, and we went back about, 4 or 5 months later and spent New Year's Eve with Bjork and her family and friends at her home.
That's so cool.
Very
That's so cool.
Magical, surreal, funny, beautiful time is described in Insomniac City.
It is. And I was very surprised to learn that her album Biophilia was inspired by his book Musicophilia. Right?
Yeah. And Oliver actually coined that term, musicophilia.
Musicophilia.
He was quite brilliant with creating new words. Musicophilia means love of music.
I'd like to go back a little bit to Stephen. How did trees help you cope with loss and grief after Stephen had died? You write about that a bit.
Yeah. My partner, Steve, with whom I'd been for something like 17 years, was younger than me and died at age 43 of a heart attack, unexpectedly, in bed beside me. So that story comes at the beginning of the book. The book is sort of bookended by these two losses, but the book is very much a celebration of life. and of recovering from grief and finding love again, whether with another person or a city. And in that 6th-floor walk-up on Grove Street in the West Village, there were these great trees outside my window that I would watch as the seasons changed and watch them hold up to the weather in New York, the sometimes brutal weather, whether wind or rain or snow or sleet or hot sun, and lose their leaves in the fall and come back in the spring and summer. And so it became a metaphor for me of recovering from grief and of surviving tough times and adapting. So there's a chapter in the book called A Year in Trees, which is really about that year in that 6th-floor walk-up, just watching the trees, who in a certain sense I felt, I know this will sound weird, but in a certain sense I felt were watching over me.
No, that's beautiful, actually. I think that's really, it's transcendental on some level. Honestly, it gets into some of these very beautiful philosophies. How does New York break your heart?
by falling in
What are
love
some
with it.
ways? By falling in love with it, okay, first. And then also, though, you meditate in Insomniac City on some of the violence and the anger that's part of the city as well. And you mentioned, you enumerate, right, that this is one of the ways in which New York can break your heart as well. I thought that was very, really insightful and kind of moving.
Yeah, there was a time I lived across from a gas station, one of the few gas stations in Manhattan, and would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to fist fights or yelling or happening on the streets of New York right below my window. So that is part of city life.
Sure. Circling back to Oliver, in 2006, for those who don't know, Oliver had developed uveal melanoma in his right eye, and he eventually went blind in that eye because of the treatment.
Right.
And then in 2015, a metastasis of that cancer was found in his liver. Please walk us through Oliver's diagnosis and what followed soon after this regarding his list and his memoir, of course, My Own Life, which you mentioned before. But more than that, the New York Times article about this illness and the subsequent outpouring of love and support from the readers of that editorial. That's what I'm really interested in hearing about, actually.
It was so incredible. He finished this memoir on the move around Christmas 2014, handed it in to his publisher, expected to see it published about a year later, which is kind of the normal course for publishing a book. And then really just 2 weeks later, he wasn't feeling well, went to the doctor, they ran a series of tests and discovered that he had untreatable terminal cancer that had metastasized from that uveal melanoma in his eye that had been treated, but it had metastasized over the years. And his liver was, filled with tumors, and it was not treatable. And his reaction to it was so incredible. The book was already done. He wanted to see it published. He knew he would die. They gave him 6 to 18 months. In fact, they were, right, accurate. He died 8 months later. But he sort of pledged or decided from the moment of that diagnosis that he would spend his last time on Earth, doing the things he loved, which was writing. There was an incredible outpouring of writing, seeing friends, being with me, traveling if he could. And within 2 weeks of that diagnosis, he wrote an essay called My Own Life, which sort of announced to the world this terminal diagnosis and how he intended to approach his illness and his death. It was a beautiful piece. I saw him write it literally across the desk from me. It came out spontaneously, and it was published just a few weeks later. I think the idea of something going viral, so to speak, was completely foreign to Oliver, who did not write on a computer. He did not have a computer. He did not text. He did not email. And the outpouring of love and gratitude and concern for Dr. Sachs, as most people knew him, because of not just the fact that he had this illness and was going to most likely die soon, but it was such a beautiful piece of writing, incredibly
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, I was with him throughout that whole period. I thought maybe that was the only piece he would write, but instead there was another a few months later and another a few months later. And he ended up sort of documenting that final year through these beautiful personal essays in the New York Times, as well as writing other pieces for the New Yorker and other publications. But
Incredible.
those 4 essays about approaching your own death and illness have been gathered in a little book called Gratitude. And it's a very beautiful short book about life as much as it is about facing one's mortality.
I'm glad he was able to spend that final year sharing these insights and these feelings.
Yeah.
To this point, you wrote Insomniac City over the span of 5 weeks in Rome,
Yeah.
right? 6 months after Oliver had died in August 2015.
Mhm.
Can you talk about this period, about writing this book, remembering your time with Oliver and your feelings for New York City while being so far away from it?
Yeah. I think I sort of had to have distance
Mhm.
from New York itself and from everything I'd gone through in the last 10 years, from Steve's illness and death to moving to New York to falling in love with Oliver, who then passed away, just a few years after Steve had.
Yeah.
But I didn't know exactly how I would construct the book. I think I sort of mentioned this earlier. I brought to Rome with me a printout of this journal or diary that I had started in 2009 at Oliver's suggestion. And by that point, it was big. It was right on a computer. So it printed out to something like 700 pages.
Wow.
And I spent my first week in Rome just reading it and sort of reliving my life and my life with Oliver and conversations with Oliver. And it was then that I just saw the book coming together, sort of like I spoke about seeing a photograph composed in my mind before I take it.
Right.
I just saw it coming together, that it would be this mix of journal entries and essays and narrative prose and photographs. And I created the book, pinning up pages on the walls of my studio in Rome, along with photographs. And just with every page, I would pin it up. By the time I left Rome, I think I was there for 5 or 6 weeks. The book was completed in its first draft. It didn't change much even after that.
Let's take a look at some of those photos that are in Insomniac City, and maybe you could talk to us about them. And of course, this is Oliver.
This is Oliver. This is actually taken in London at his childhood home in the backyard.
Ah, that's great.
An early trip we made. Right outside my window in one of my apartments, looking out on the street, fire engines roaring in the middle of the night in the winter.
Very dynamic.
Yeah.
Oliver in bed.
This is Oliver in his last year, 2015. Although he was ill, he never stopped working, never stopped writing. Always had a pen at hand. You can see him with a pad. As I said, he didn't write on a computer. He was fortunate to have an assistant who would then take the pads, who could decipher his handwriting and type them up and transcribe them into manuscripts. But all of his writing in the years I was with him was composed on yellow legal pads.
Some of the portraits.
Yeah, just a beauty on the streets of New York. I'm pretty sure this was 8th Avenue. I remember taking that picture. I think it was in 2009, my first year. And one of those just amazing faces.
Yeah.
And she was leaning against, what still existed then, sort of like a phone booth. And I just said, "Can I take your picture?" And she said, "Sure."
And I got to tell you, the wind really agreed with you.
Yeah.
It was, it was very cooperative.
Yeah. Probably a model, but I don't know for
Yeah.
sure. We didn't talk a long time.
Sure. I could see it. I love this one.
I took tons of pictures of people on park benches. Park benches became kind of a theme. And one of the reasons is the picture is already composed in a sense. And I saw this couple, they're holding hands in Jackson Square Park, and approached warily. You don't want to interrupt someone's sort of private moment or intimate moment. But I just, what I do is I just say exactly what I'm thinking, exactly what I'm feeling. And so I said to them something like, I don't remember exactly, but I said to them something like, this would be such an incredible picture. And I would love to take your photograph, may I? And I always would offer to send a photograph, a copy, if they wanted it. And they just, looked at each other and they just kind of shrugged, went, and they took it. And the key is to take it really fast.
Right. You were saying before they start to get too self-conscious.
Yeah.
Here's another great.
Yeah. This is, I think, Lower East Side, again, really early in my time in New York, when I was just wandering around the city, getting to know the city. Two young women at a bodega sitting outside.
Great.
This was a man, this was on 14th Street. I don't remember the exact year, but I met him on the same day he had just gotten out of jail.
Oh, wow.
Gotten out of Rikers. And he wasn't homeless, but I did see him a lot in that area and photographed him a lot over the years. But that is the one picture of him in Insomniac City.
It's great face.
Yeah. I love this.
Yeah.
This is titled End of the Day, because I think it's under the High Line. And I just came across these construction workers. Again, you can see how they're seated. It's like they're already posed for a photograph. And I could see it in my mind as I approached them. All I had to say was, hey guys, this would be a great photo. May I take your picture? And before they could think about it too much, they said, sure.
That's great. I love it. This is beautiful.
There's
a whole story behind this.
Yeah, this is one of the few photos in the book where there's a story behind it. This is an amazing woman named Ilona, a neighbor in the West Village, an incredible woman. She was probably 95 when I took that photograph. She ended up living till age 100. I first saw her in Jackson Square Park. She was unmissable because although this is a black and white photo, she had bright orange hair. And she also had at least 1 or 2 inch long false eyelashes, which she made out of her own bright orange hair.
That's great.
These incredible eyelashes.
I love that photo. This is great too.
Yeah. Someone on the streets of 8th Avenue I would see a lot. Her name was Karen. And there's something so calm and trusting, and there's some connection. Even though we never became friends, really, we just saw each other a lot. When people agreed to let me take their picture, there's an immediate sense of trust that I can't even really explain, to be honest.
Yeah. And it's palpable, that calmness and that just kind of serene and just very comfortable.
Yeah, I can't even really explain it. If someone asked me if they could take my picture, I might say no.
Yeah.
This is Oliver working on that essay I mentioned, My Own Life. So this is, I guess it's January 2015, just very shortly after he got his diagnosis. Always working, always writing. This is a touching picture for me. Oliver had many obsessions and interests, not just neurology, but botany, ferns. He's obsessed with the periodic table since he'd been a young boy, and collected the elements of the periodic table, at least those that weren't radioactive or toxic or poisonous.
Sure, of course.
And these are some pieces from his collection of elements from the periodic table, as well as fossils. He loved fossils. At the top of that photo, you can see a little jar that's filled with mercury.
Oh, wow.
Which isn't the most safe thing on Earth, but mercury is the 80th element in the periodic table. So a friend of his gave him a bottle of mercury on his 80th birthday.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you for walking us through those photos, Bill.
Sure.
Let's move on to Sweat, A History of Exercise. Where does one start when deciding to research the history of exercise? Yeah, I feel like it's one of these things that we take for granted, like, oh, fitness and exercise has always been there, right? But for you, it was with this 1573 book, The Art of Exercise by Girolamo Mercuriale.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, they're going to take away my Italian American card if I mess that up. Please tell us about this book.
Well, as with others of my books, the idea came to me suddenly, unexpectedly. I was at the gym one day about 10 years ago and on top of a Stairmaster. And for some reason on that day, I just paused before I started the Stairmaster. I looked out at the gym floor, all these people bench pressing, doing crunches, pull-ups, push-ups, yoga. And I just thought, how did we all end up here? How did we all end up in gyms?
That's interesting.
And if I were to trace a line backward in time, where would I land to the beginnings of exercise? So I literally got off the Stairmaster and went to the public library looking for a book on the history of exercise because I was just curious.
Right.
When did exercise begin? And I did not find one. And it was then that kind of the light bulb went on or off, whatever the metaphor is. And I thought that could be a really interesting subject for a book.
Yeah.
This book, unlike Insomniac City, took years to develop and research. It is a history of exercise, not just a memoir, but woven into it is a personal narrative.
Yes.
But yes, one of the places I started was at the New York Academy of Medicine Medical Library. And I told the librarian I had this idea to write a book on the history of exercise. And she said, well, surely you've heard of Girolamo Mercuriale.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked up at her and I said,
surely not.
Absolutely not. I said, hold on a moment. And she went back to the rare books room and returned wearing white gloves and holding a pristine first edition of a book first published in 1569 called Dell'arte Gymnastica. It's considered the first comprehensive book on exercise. And she allowed me to study it. I opened it up to a page that was illustrated, woodcut engravings of two pairs of naked men wrestling, immediately captivating.
Yes, for sure.
And then I turned the page and realized that the entire book, which was very thick, was written in medieval Latin. So I couldn't really read a word. I don't read Latin.
Sure.
But it started me on a journey that led me to retrace the footsteps of Mercuriale, who wrote this book in Rome. And I tracked down an English translation, was able to read it. I tracked down the translator himself. It took me sort of on a journey almost around the world as I researched the history of exercise.
How did your father and his influence regarding exercise inform your approach to this book?
Yeah, as I said, the book is an interweaving of history based on original research and personal narrative. And I had to write about my dad. I was the only son in a big family. I had 5 sisters, grew up in a small city in eastern Washington state called Spokane. And my dad was a kind of classic mid-century military guy, West Point graduate, Korean War vet, very athletic. And as the only son, he sort of trained me in exercise and sports, and also took me to all kinds of sporting events, everything from, football games and baseball games to hockey, the rodeo. Rodeo was popular in Washington, boat shows, car shows. So this sort of father-son bonding over exercise and athletics and sports became, I think, central really to who I am in a certain way. And I wrote about that in a kind of memoir chapter in Sweat.
In Sweat.
I've always had this interest in the human body, and I think it really started there.
Interesting. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts more about some more of your thoughts about boxing boot camp, and what boxing taught you. You write very viscerally about what it feels like to throw a punch and to get hit.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, for Sweat, I not only did research in archives and libraries around the world, but I decided I have to try just about any
Yeah.
form of exercise. So yes, I tried yoga. I was already a runner and
Mhm.
lifted at gyms, but I decided I had to learn how to box because
Mhm.
boxing and wrestling were very much part of the exercise and athletic culture in antiquity. So I signed up for
Yes.
this intense 6-week boxing boot camp. Um, that was an hour and a half every morning, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. And it wasn't sort of aerobics, cardio, kickboxing. It was real
Yeah.
boxing, led by two Golden Gloves champions with a ring. And we were padded and wore gloves, but even so, I learned that it's one thing to hit someone; it's another thing to get hit back
Yes.
and to get knocked down, if not nearly knocked out or bloodied up. But I did make it through all 6 weeks, and I found, even though sometimes it was scary or it was hard to get through a class, there was a certain beauty in the choreography
Yeah.
of the combinations that they teach you
Mhm.
in boxing.
It's like ballet almost
It's
on some
yeah,
level. Yeah.
yeah. I think in the book I call it I liken it to violent yoga.
So yeah, that's good.
It has its own choreography, and the coaches or teachers were very strict about getting those combinations right.
I really do appreciate that your approach was empirical and experiential and not just academic and scholastic. This I was really I didn't know this about the ancient Greek athletes who considered sweat medicinal.
Yeah,
Say more about that.
that is a very interesting fact I
Yeah,
uncovered.
yeah.
In ancient Greece and Rome, we're talking 5th century BC, 8th century BC, the sweat of athletes was considered a prized commodity.
Hmm,
And they actually created an instrument called the strigil,
hmm,
with which athletes would scrape the sweat and oil from their bodies after competing or after exercising. The strigil was shaped sort of like a celery stalk, but made out of bronze or metal, and then funnel it into little clay pots. And this presumably funky smelling mixture of sweat and oil it had a name, it was called gloios.
Close, yeah.
And it was sold at gyms. And there were gyms in antiquity in most towns in the ancient Greek Empire. Um, the better the athlete, the higher the price. The belief being that the sweat of athletes must contain the essence of arete or excellence, what
Hmm.
made those athletes elite athletes or superior athletes. And it was sold as a medicinal, kind of a medicinal medicine.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of recoil at the idea of of drinking of consuming someone's sweat. Um, but that's an
Hey,
incredible
but we do
insight.
lots of crazy things today
But we do. You're right. I do
to make
agree.
ourselves look better or stronger or faster or whatever.
This
So
was antiquity's version of that, of
yeah,
all the wacky things we do these days.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the refutation of those who think everyone should exercise and your discovery in Milan.
Yeah, I loved that.
Yeah.
Mercuriali, in his book, De Arte Gymnastica, goes through every form of exercise known at that time. So there are chapters on walking, running, swimming, any form of movement. Of course, there isn't a chapter on bicycling because the bicycle wasn't invented until the 19th century.
Hmm.
And Mercuriali was Renaissance era. But he also has a chapter on those who dread exercise or refuse to exercise, with a kind of empathy that I found touching,
Hmm.
and understanding. But what I think is important about Mercuriale is that he was a physician. He was a personal physician to a very prominent cardinal in Rome. And so the book is written from a doctor's perspective. What exercises are good for you? How can they benefit you? What exercises, such as boxing, might be harmful, and you might end up being injured. So it's in a way he was ahead of his time in thinking about exercise as something that promoted health or wellness. But one also has to remember that in the 16th century up until 17th, 18th century, and going back to antiquity, no one had an accurate understanding of how the human body really works.
Right.
So it's based on the theory of the four humors,
Mm-hmm.
which was a kind of fantastical theory or conception of how the body worked based on four liquids or humors. It wasn't until William Harvey discovered the circulation of blood by the beat of the heart that we really began to understand the cardiovascular system.
Interesting. That's so interesting. We're going to be taking questions for Bill shortly, so please start sending them in. I have a few more questions of my own while we wait. To the point that you just made, please discuss this rest principle and the connection for you between exercise and writing.
As one thing I did along with trying all different forms of exercise, I became certified as a personal trainer just to learn what it's like to be trained as a personal trainer. I'd used personal trainers before, but I went through another course, sort of like the boxing course, but to learn how to be a trainer. And one of the principles that they emphasized was called the rest principle. And that is really the importance of letting your body, letting your muscles rest, that you don't need to, that it's not good to exercise heavily every single day. Moderately, yes, but you do need to take days off just so your body can rest and repair.
Right.
So there's a kind of, I think, for me at least, metaphor related to writing and needing to take breaks from writing or photography or whatever the art form is. And that having that time away, that rest, can only make you better at your work.
Yeah, I agree. I spoke with Terry Roach of the Roaches, the folk singer, a couple of months ago. She's fantastic. And she said, right now I'm not working on anything. I'm just, I don't feel the need to constantly produce. I'm just kind of resting. I'm just sort of resting my creative muscles until something comes my way that compels me to start producing again. And I think that as a creative person, as an intellectual person, it's really sagacious, right? It's really useful.
I've been in that period for quite a while now. I'm working on a screenplay, but not every day.
Right. It's good to rest.
Yeah.
Formal exercise was legitimized in 1950 by a man named Jeremy Morris through this massive 31,000 individual study, right? What did he find? What was the big finding there?
There was an intuitive understanding going back to Hippocrates, the father of medicine, that exercise is good for you. But surprisingly enough, at least to me, solid scientific research into the benefits of exercise did not come until the mid-1950s. And really one of the leaders of this was a kind of unassuming epidemiologist in London named Jeremy Morris. He was interested in learning why there was a rise in cardiovascular disease. And he had the brilliant, inventive idea to study a large group of people in the same occupation and see the differences. So he studied the drivers and the conductors of double-decker buses and trolleys in London. Now, the drivers just sit behind the wheel and drive all day. The conductors would get off and on the double-decker bus, get people on the bus, go up and down the stairs. In a sense, they spend their entire working day working out, climbing stairs, walking, moving. I tell people, think of exercise as synonymous with movement. And after a year of studying these men and their the mortality rates and clinically studying them, learned that the conductors who spent their days moving and running up and down stairs had a far lower mortality and morbidity rate than the drivers who were pretty much sedentary all day.
Sure.
And then he recreated that study with postal workers, where he learned that those who delivered the mail, walking all day, delivering mail, tended to be healthier, lower incidence of cardiovascular disease than their counterparts who maybe worked in the office in administrative jobs. And he published these findings in the Lancet, the British Medical Journal. And that's really considered one of the first scientific studies on exercise.
That's interesting. You know, I go to the gym probably 5 times a week. I mix of cardio and weightlifting, and
Right.
I always try to encourage my friend to go to a gym because he doesn't. But he works as a like a like a porter, so he's like schlepping heavy luggage all
Yeah.
day. He's like, Brian, I probably get more exercise than you do just through my 8 hour shift, because my
Yeah.
job is pretty sedentary, so I need to go to a gym to
Yeah.
move. um your book is so comprehensive. It covers the changing trends, defining eras, and emerging personalities in fitness, starting with Eugene Sandow, the world's first famous bodybuilder, then Jack LaLanne, Jane Fonda, who gave you a nice blurb, of course, Lou Ferrigno, Arnold Schwarzenegger, onto home fitness routines and the emergence of gyms, a multi-billion-dollar industry, all
Mhm.
the way to the recent rise of Peloton and Mirror. You also cover the devastation of AIDS and the coronavirus and all of this. My question becomes, I guess, where do you see fitness going from here?
Yeah. I mean, technology plays a big part,
Mhm.
doesn't it? I mean, you see people at the gym working out, maybe not even with a personal trainer, but with an app on their phone. Um, and of course, with Apple Watches or Fitbits, or even with your phone, you can keep track of
Mhm.
how many calories you're burning in a day, how many steps you're walking. And so there's a new consciousness, I think, which is healthy, that
Mhm.
just moving your body is a form of exercise. So
Yes.
if you walk to work, or you talked about your friend who's a porter, if he kept track of how much he's moving during the day, might be surprised to learn how many calories he's burning, how many steps he's taking during a day. So I think
And yeah,
technology is a big part of how exercise will be perceived and changed.
it'd be incredible. I mean, just to that point where he's like lugging heavy luggage all day, every day. If there will eventually become a gadget that can gauge how much you're lifting in the
Yeah,
course of a day, you know?
that's a great idea.
Um, yeah, let's get a trademark on that, Bill. Let's work on it.
Yeah,
Uh,
let's go on Shark Tank.
okay, yeah, absolutely. I love it. Okay, our first question came. I'm so excited about the film of Insomniac City, which is such a beautiful book. Is Bill able to tell us a little bit more about the film?
Yeah, when I wrote the book, never imagined it as a film,
Mm.
but uh, a very creative and wonderful producer did see it as a film right away and asked me from the beginning to write the screenplay.
Mm.
So he really, and I said, "Well, I've never written a screenplay." He said, "I will help you. I'll help you develop it. I have a kind of method," and he did indeed. And so adapting the book into a film was a great creative challenge.
Mm.
Had to be very compressed. Find the narrative that could be sustained in a film, and the cinematic aspects of the book. I think because I'm a photographer and I see things visually, it maybe helped me a little more than it might have,
Mm.
because I could picture scenes that would work beautifully in film, and even scenes in the book that maybe aren't set in classic New York settings could be moved to other places. I
Sure.
want viewers of the film to feel like they're immersed in New York City, just like I was when I
Mm.
moved here in 2009. So part of the process of adapting your own book into a screenplay is cutting. So it's compressed. There are things that have to be left out, but
Sure.
I think the essence of the book is there for sure. It's a romance. It's a romance about falling in love with New York, and a romance about falling in love with another person.
And presumably, there's going to be actors cast to play the roles of you and Oliver,
Yeah,
your characters in this film. How does that feel?
pretty weird. Pretty weird.
Yeah.
People always ask me when they hear about this, who's going to play you? And I have nothing to do with that, and we'll see. But the film has been financed and is in development, and I'm working on some revisions right now.
We look
I'm
forward
excited
to it.
about it. It's just really, I mean, it felt like such a gift to be given the opportunity to learn a kind of new form,
Sure.
screenwriting. You said you've written screenplays yourself.
Yeah, it's a
It's so very different from writing a book,
yep.
and dependent on very compressed dialogue. I found I really enjoyed it a lot. I'd love to write more screenplays.
Yeah, it's so different from writing a novel or a memoir
Yeah.
or a nonfiction book that it's so freeing because it's such a different type of animal.
Yeah.
You just got back from New Zealand and Australia. You were there for 3 weeks for a conference. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was in Australia and New Zealand for 3 weeks, really on a kind of book tour for Insomniac City and Sweat. Australia, in particular, is amazing for having these great writers' festivals in the month of May.
Hmm.
A writers' festival in different cities over each subsequent weekend in the month of May. So I went to festivals in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and then Auckland, New Zealand, and did events and did some press and did readings and really had an amazing time.
Hmm. That's great. Um, the books are Insomniac City, New York, Oliver Sacks and Me, and Sweat, A History of Exercise. Bill, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And sorry about the delay earlier.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.